Now for the second season, let's call this Season 2, Part 1. That's sort of the way I'm setting it up here. Season 2, Part 1. This is the quote-unquote new cloth season. That's what they're calling it, which makes sense because, you know, all the Bronze Saints get new cloth. And not just the main characters, also Shun and Hyoga, because now, since they've lost their little curse affliction thing that Mars gave them, they don't have to worry about it anymore, and they can use their cloths now, as can Shiryu and Seiya and Iki. We'll get to that later on, but they get new cloths, and I like these new cloths because they look more like the Saint Seiya cloths. With the first one, they looked kind of slim, which I liked because then one, you know, they're slimmer, they're not as bulky looking. So it's probably easier to animate. And two, with the Saint Seiya line of action figures, the Myth Cloth, you have to kind of put them together. They're almost like model kits in a way with metal parts, but with a series now using slimmer parts for their armor, you could potentially make a line of action figures that are geared more towards a younger audience that don't really have the patience or the skill to handle a expensive figure, mind you, with you know, metal parts that could potentially fall off. Not saying that I'm young or that I am not good enough to friggin' handle a action figure. Heck, I've got 3 of the Myth Cloth already, including Koga's second cloth. They actually made one, and there's also one of Eden in his second cloth as well. But if you're looking at the image, you'll also see a new character, a Steel Saint named Subaru, who's pretty dang important. And, you know, if you know Saint Seiya, you're probably thinking, great, Steel Saints, they're not even canon. Well, that's true, but at the same time, it kind of also shows, you know, what really makes a saint. So, because, you know, he's a Steel Saint, so he's obviously not as powerful as the Bronze Saints. But, because, like, he doesn't have any Cosmo in him. You know, like, chi. It'd be like a martial artist who's learned how to use chi versus a martial artist who hasn't, or who hasn't trained for very long. You know, that's that kind of difference. Though Subaru does kind of become a saint later on, and I'll get to that later on. So he joins the group, and there's this new enemy named Pallas, who happens to be Athena's sister, and she wants to kill Athena. They're destined to fight. And Seiya was sent out to go kill her with the god-killing dagger, and of course he couldn't do it because he didn't like it. He didn't like it one bit. But so he didn't do it, and of course he regrets it later on because in this situation, you know, he could have prevented it, and now it's becoming more traumatic. And of course, because, you know, Athena, or Saori, is Pallas' sister, you know, she doesn't want to fight her. So she's kind of putting this off while Pallas sends her Pallasites at the saints and beats them up. And, you know, all these saints are, you know, beating up all these Pallasites that have different ranks. You know, Eden pretends to be a Pallasite for a little bit. And, you know, the first few episodes are kind of just showing all the Bronze Saints getting their new cloths. One in particular, Haruto's, I found interesting because after the whole thing with Mars, he feels like he doesn't really have a purpose anymore. So he is listening to the radio, and of course they decide to be cute and use the new theme song for the show, because they rotate theme songs based on the season. Which I'll do the theme songs later on. This is more of like a story recap here. I'll get into my thoughts kind of in between, but also near the end. And Haruto then decides to become a singer for a band. And that kind of becomes his thing. He feels like, that's my calling. I'm not going to be a saint anymore. And of course, Koga tries to convince him, you know, be a saint. You know, Pallasites attack, and Haruto then realizes that he needs to be a saint. It's his duty. Or does he? After they beat the bad guy and he's gotten his new cloth, he's like, it's my duty as a saint to protect Athena and defend the Saints and protect them from evil. And of course, he's got this look on his face where like he's kind of just doing it begrudgingly. Like not that he's being forced to, but like it's something he doesn't really want to do. And Koga, they zoom in on Koga's face and he's looking at him, and he can tell that Haruto doesn't really want to do it. And it's an interesting plot point, I think, because it makes you wonder, okay, is Haruto going to put that much effort into it? And of course he does. But the thing is, they don't elaborate on it. And that's one of my issues with this second season, even though I actually really like it. Heck, I think Hikaru Midorikawa does an even better job as Koga, because Koga's older now. They're all older now, except for Subaru, who's pretty dang young because he's new. But the characters who were there beforehand, they're older. And so Koga, he has a lower voice, and so it's more like the Hikaru Midorikawa voice that most people think. And I like it because it's probably a little bit easier on his voice, both because he's more used to doing lower voices, but also just because it's probably more natural for him. But anywho, and so that they don't really touch upon, and they do show Shiryu, which with him, since his original voice actor died, so we can't really get him back. And Takahiro Sakurai, he sounds like a younger Shiryu, which is one of the reasons why I think he's actually a little bit more fitting, because, in the original series, Shiryu is like 14. But he's then played by Ken Narita, who is known for playing Bright Noah in the any of the redos in the original Gundam, like the Amuro Ray Gundam, where Toru Furuya also played. And interestingly enough, Shiryu's voice actor, Hirotaru Suzuoki, I believe his name is, also played Bright Noah, which is interesting, kind of how they're using those connections. And I actually think he does a pretty good job as well. I haven't heard enough of the original to really be able to tell. I'm honestly more used to the OVA/video game, the Masakazu Morita cast, more than the Toru Furuya cast. But I think Ken Narita does a good job with Shiryu, though since Ryuho is the Dragon Saint, and the Libra Saint is Genbu, which happens to be one of Doko's students that he teaches in his off time. Apparently, I don't even understand. But so Shiryu's not even really a saint anymore. He's kind of just retired in a way, though not really. And speaking of retired saints, Jabu also shows up to train Soma in the first season, but he is actually a retired saint, and he teaches Soma the Lionette Bomber, because for some reason he knows that, even though he was the Unicorn Saint. But of course, there's no rule saying that saints can't learn each other's moves. In the first season, the Gemini Saint Paradox uses the Rozan Rising Dragon, or the Rozan Shoryuha, which is a Shiryu and Ryuho's move, or their attack. And of course, Koga likes to use the Pegasus Meteor Punch, or the Pegasus Ryuseiken. And he also uses the Pegasus Senkoken. But anywho, I'm getting a little off track, though this is a kind of a scatterbrained dealio anyway. But anywho, so it sort of starts off with the Saints kind of trying to fend off the Pallasites that keep coming towards them because Saori's not doing anything. And then, the Ares Saint, Kiki, who you'll probably recognize from the original as the little kid who helped Ares Mu, which I actually thought was really cool. Kiki's actually one of my favorite of the Gold Saints besides Seiya and Genbu. Ares Kiki is probably my favorite out of the new ones, of the new Gold Saints. I mean, they all have their moments. But he essentially tells, the Bronze Saints that, they're not doing too well. Wait, no, that's later. I'm getting mixed up. It's actually Genbu I'm thinking about. He's the one who kind of tells the Bronze Saints that, you know, they shouldn't rely on just their cloths solely. They're just relying on their cloths and kind of hiding behind it as opposed to burning their Cosmo through it. And that's going to come up later on in an interesting, silent, indirect way, which I find kind of interesting. And there, you know, Genbu joins in the fight. He's kind of in the sidelines serving as like the high guard for Athena. And he gets killed by one of the higher Pallasites, and there he reveals Omega, which is the highest level that your Cosmo can go. You know, it's essentially like God level, which, you know, Koga's already considered a God killer in the series, so he's pretty special. You know, I'd argue that he is already a legendary saint. But, and then at that point, Saori decides to go in and do the attack. So they go to Pallas' castle, and by they, I mean everybody. The original Fab Five, the original legendary Bronze Saints from the original, Seiya's crew, they go, like, and of course, Seiya, he's got his Sagittarius cloth, but he still has it in the quote-unquote clothstone form. Part of the thing with the new cloths is that they upgrade from their clothstone form to the actual big boxes of the original, which, you know, that's all cool, and it sort of implies a whole thing about the cloths being in a weaker state from the whole Mars thing. And, you know, Shun and Hyoga, they both get new cloths, so they look all snazzy and whatnot. We even have an entire episode dedicated to Shun, where he talks about Iki a little bit. And, of course, since Genbu's dead, Shiryu comes in and becomes the new Libra Gold Saint, which I know a lot of fans are both happy and upset over that. I know there's this one guy who's like, if they kill Genbu just to make Shiryu the Libra Gold Saint, I quit. And he tried to, but we didn't really let him because he uploaded the next episode previews and we needed him. But anyway. And not only that, but also the original Steel Saints, who you could argue have Cosmo now because they're pretty dang strong. Not only that, but Lionette Ban and Wolf Naichi, who don't even have their cloths anymore, they come back. And of course, since they don't have their cloths, they're having to use Steel Saint versions of their cloths. But it's cool because, you know, it really shows that, you know, the cloth is one thing, but also it's your power. Like, the way I think of cloths and how I explain how they work, I'd put it in Dragon Ball Z terms. Like, I think of Kaioken, Goku's attack where he turns red and whatnot. You know, Kaioken, it amplifies his power, but it's amplifying exactly that, his power. You know, it can get stronger if he gets stronger, and the amplification, it amplifies it, so it makes it stronger, but it's only going as far, it's only going at a certain level. Like, that's why Kaioken Goku couldn't beat up Frieza. He had to go Super Saiyan later on. It's, you know, it wasn't strong enough. He needed a further push. I guess Super Saiyan is also kind of another example of how the cloths work. But anyway, and so all these saints are coming in, and even Jabu shows up later on. But not only that, but Subaru, he's getting a bit of focus because while they're fighting all these different Pallasites, and throughout the second season, even at the beginning, Subaru's been showing off signs of having Cosmo, and that he's actually pretty powerful. And then, of course, he later gets a cloth. He gets the Aquilius cloth, which I think they only did to tie in with the Saint Seiya show manga that started up, because the protagonist in that is a female saint, but she used the Aquilius cloth as well, which is essentially like basically, if I could compare the cloths to soda, the Aquilius cloth is like Coke Zero, I guess. So Subaru gets the cursed Aquilius cloth, so he's now a saint, and he actually gets to do some decent damage. He was already pretty powerful before. They had one episode dedicated to him using a new attack he has called Pleiades Impact, and which is interesting because Subaru translates to Pleiades, so I initially thought he was going to be the Pleiades saint, if they even had one, which I don't think they do. Or if they do, we only get to see it in like filler or something. But I thought that it was cool to kind of see him get a cloth, and fans who were watching it kind of speculated. There was a lot of speculation going on at where the series was going to go, but one highlight from the first part of the second season is a battle with Koga and this other Pallasite who tries. I think it's Europa. It's either Mira or Europa. Who was is being like, oh, you're jealous of Seiya because he gets a lot of attention from Athena, and they're really close, and Koga's kind of quote unquote jealous, which is true, and they show, and then of course like, no, I'm not jealous, and he beats him, but then as he leaves, it does that little anime thing where like when a character's kind of upset about something, their head is low and you can't really see their eyes over like a dark shading beneath their hair and their bangs. They do something like that, which shows that, he is actually jealous. And again, they don't follow up on it. I mean, I know they don't really have the time right now to follow up on it. I mean, they're kind of at war, so they can't really put too many personal feelings into this. But I think that it would have been interesting if they follow up on it in like a season 3, if they ever do one, which I think is possible. But anyway, there we get through the first part, and they go through all the different Pallasites. One of the Gold Saints returns as a Pallasite, which is a bit of a throwback to the Hades arc, with the Gold Saints turning into specters and getting surplices. So that's a thing, and of course they do the friggin' Gold Saint Gemini thing where there are actually 2. I think her name is Eterna or something. She comes back, and it's interesting because she comes back, but it's interesting because they're both played by the same voice actress, Yukana, who you'll recognize as Tyr and other people, but it's funny because like it's almost like 2 different kinds of people, as opposed to with Kenon and Saga. They were essentially twins, which they are here, but Integra's her name, and I didn't even have to look at Wikipedia for that. But anyway, so yeah, and to close up with season 2, part 1, we start to see more of Pallas's personal guards, the 4 kings, including Titan, who is the most dedicated to Pallas for reasons I'll get into later. But essentially, they're Pallas's most powerful fighters, and they've got the power of 3 Gold Saints in 1 each. So they're pretty powerful. Yeah. Now on to Season 2, Part 2, which is the end of Saint Seiya Omega. And if you're looking at the picture, you're probably thinking, oh, they all get friggin' upgrades. And it's something. It's definitely something. Of course, Athena pulls out her cloth, and, Iki finally shows up, and of course, he's the one guy whose cloth hasn't changed at all, and he's played by Tomokazu Sugita, which I was also kind of skeptical of. I think he does an okay job, though it doesn't really sound like a character voice. It just sounds like a celebrity playing a character, which is, you might have heard me say that with a few different other series, but essentially, at this point, the gang is starting to go through the remaining Pallasites, including the 4 kings, and they're taking them out. They start off fighting, not Hyperion, Aigion. He's the first one that the Saints fight, and that's where Iki shows up, and there he takes care of one of them for him, and of course he ends up killing himself because of it, which I feel like is the first show of like the legendary saints from the original actually showing off their power, because you would think that if they're so powerful they would be able to beat the enemies really easily, but the thing is these new enemies are probably even stronger than any other enemy they've faced. Not to mention, some with the Hades arc, a lot of the enemies they fought were older ones. Like And these new characters are probably stronger than the judges of Hades, perhaps. Or at least as strong as like Poseidon and whatnot, so. Plus, in these kind of shonen shows, power doesn't always equal everything. It's also, plot. But anyway. And so that gets taken care of. But then Mira, the cloth destroyer guy, because he has a glove that destroys cloth, pretty much breaks all of the Bronze Saints' cloth, all their cloths. The Koga's group, not like Hyoga or Shun. And so Iki has to fix them, and that's where he's all like, you really need to stop relying on your cloth. And he basically kind of goes through each one and tells them why they also, even with Yuna, who you would think would be probably one of the best fighters, Kiki's like, Yuna, you fight too much, you go too much by the book. You're not a good enough fighter, and of course she takes it, pretty well. Everyone else is just like, how dare you, Kiki? But that's where they sort of get their act together, and by the time they get to the blonde-haired chick of the Four Kings, which is funny because she's a girl, even though it's the Four Kings and not the Three Kings and the Queen. But Gallia, her name is. When she fights them, that's where they get the Omega comes out, and that's where they start kicking butt. Because these Bronze Saints, they're getting Omega, so they're actually becoming pretty powerful now. Even with their new cloths, they were at a certain level, but now they're getting even stronger. And so they defeat Gallia, and there everyone kind of splits off, and that's where it gets more personable episodes. And then the Koga's group gets to Hyperion, who they struggle with. And then friggin' Ares Kiki, Virgo Fudo, who's the new Virgo Saint, and Libra Shiryu, they come in and they do what's known as Athena's Exclamation, which is a forbidden move where 3 gold saints or 3 saints will burn their cosmos to the absolute Cosmo. Really, I kind of go back and forth between Cosmo and Cosmos. They burn their Cosmo to the absolute limit and shoot like this giant energy blast. But it's banned. Athena's forbidden it. And if you use it, you lose your sainthood, which I think is kind of dumb, because you would think risking your life for the greater good would make you even more honorable than any saint. So why you would lose your sainthood is beyond me. I kind of understand why, though. The losing your sainthood is more of like a metaphor for... It's either a metaphor for the saints dying, because that's generally what happens. After you use it, you die. Because you're essentially tapping into your life force as well. And that it was also probably to scare any saints from using it. It's like, oh, if you use this, you're no longer a saint. You're dead to me. In harsh words, but they use it, and they damage Hyperion, but they don't kill him. So now even more saints are dead. Iki's been killed, so sort of his whole thing about the Phoenix cloth being immortal. That's kind of out the window, or is it? I'll get to that later. And Fudo, Kiki, and Shiryu are presumed dead. So we've lost one of the legendary saints, or 2 of the legendary saints, which is unfortunate because now there are only 3. And of course, everyone has a big cry off. Even Seiya goes, and of course, Hyoga, he cries. He cries for Iki, and of course, he also cries for Shiryu as well, I'm sure. I don't remember him actually. I remember him crying for Iki, but he tried to be cool about it. No pun intended, or actually pun very intended. But anyway, and so we've lost more saints, and of course Hyperion's still alive, and this is where these new Omega cloths come in. The saints burn their Cosmo to the absolute limit, the Omega, and that's where they get their new cloths that you see. So now they are even stronger. Like at first when they burned their Cosmo to get to Omega with a little bit, to a little bit of Omega. They got like enhancements to their cloths. Like Koga got wings. Eden got like this little spiritual armor around him. Ryuho got a whip to go with his shield. But now with Omega cloths, they're essentially going around in God cloths for the remainder of the show. And so they're pretty powerful. They beat Hyperion. And at this point, they have to go to Titan, who is Pallas' right-hand man, and also probably the most powerful. But here, Seiya decides to step in because, he's the right-hand man of Athena, or Saori, and Titan being the right-hand man of Pallas. And, of course, every other saint has been beaten up by a bunch of others. And, of course, Taurus Harbinger, he steps in as well. He's the one who actually fights first. Sorry, this is kind of scatterbrained, but that's generally how I roll with these kind of videos. They're meant to be kind of long and off the cuff. But he is the one to fight first, and we learned that, he keeps saying, he's not really worthy of being a saint. He's an interesting one because you would think he would be a bad guy based on his backstory. Like, he liked to kill people and break bones. Like, that's sort of his fetish, if you will. Yet he's still fighting for Athena, and he's trying to protect her. And, of course, she entrusts him with her cloth, which shows that she's putting trust in him and that she sees the light in his darkness, and that he's not really that bad of a person. But, and then he reveals, I'm just doing my thing, and then, says, you're a pretty honorable saint. This becomes important later on with the saints, because what happens at the end. But anyway, so he decides to take a rest, and there Seiya and Titan duke it out. And of course, Seiya being the protagonist of the first series, you would think he'd be pretty powerful because he has not only worn a god cloth before, but anyway, and of course he upgrades his cloth by literally powering up. He's been staying his cloth stone form for the duration of the show until this very moment. And here they reveal a quote-unquote secret, which I think was more geared towards those who were either questioning Seiya's views and morals and his faith, as well as those new to the series, because it's all living behind a lie, Seiya's true motives. But all it really was just, Seiya's not really, he's not really doing it because he has to. He's doing it because he wants to. He doesn't like being ordered around, and sort of that hot-headedness comes back. It's still a different Seiya, though, so it kind of falls a little flat, because I see Seiya as more like a Iolia figure. They kind of try to bring back. I mean, he's still the adult here. He's 30 years old at this point, even though he doesn't look a lick older than 18 or something, or early 20s. But so it's more about him, and he even stopped saying Athena, because early on in the show he kept saying Athena, 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 Athena. But then he finally starts calling her Saori-san to be specific, which is what Koga does as well, because they both knew her on a personal level. Seiya having known her since she was a child, and Koga having known her since he was a child. While Shina was training him to become a saint. But so it's more of a reveal that he's not trying to be. He's only doing it he's only being the tough sort of leader of the saints, just to kind of serve as an example for the saints. His real thing is that he's only doing it just because he loves Saori and whatnot, and they kind of show it a little bit, but even again it still falls flat. And here, early on, at this point, a little bit early on, it's revealed that Europa and Mira are actually kind of working for someone else, a third party. And Pallas knew. She's like, oh, I know. I'm the goddess of love. Do you really think I could actually kill somebody? And so she's like, okay, let's just fight. Let's just get it over with. And let's do things. And because she's kind of struggling with things as well. She thinks that people are really bad. And that's a bit of a theme here. Like, people are bad. No, they're not, The show can get kind of cheesy at times. But, so Athena and Pallas, they duke it out. So the two goddesses are fighting, and of course Athena wins, and she is able to convince Pallas, I love you, and love is good, and people aren't so bad. And she's like, okay, I believe you, Athena. And then of course Titan, he turns good as well, because he's just following Pallas. It really shows that he's actually, he's really dedicated. He's not even really a bad guy. He's actually my favorite of the four kings, because out of all of them, he was the one who was the most dedicated and wasn't really trying to work for someone else. He was completely dedicated to Pallas, and I really like that. And his voice actor, Eiji Takamoto's a great voice actor as well. But anyway. And then later, it's revealed that it turns out that Subaru is actually the god of time, Saturn. And the Aquilius cloth gets destroyed, and Subaru turns into Saturn. And that's where the big fight sort of comes out. He beats up, the Saints a little bit. Then he goes off to his little planet. So they have to travel back to his planet, or this planet they're on, while Hyoga and Shun take care of Europa and Mira with the assistance of Titan and Harbinger. And of course, Athena and Pallas have been sapped of their energy, because not only have they been duking it out, so they're probably tired, but also Athena has been getting her power drained by, her energy drained by Pallas, while Pallas has been growing older and whatnot. But anyway, so, and then they show have like a little mini filler episode dedicated to showing, that the non-Saints can actually use power too. Like, with them, I'd almost argue that they're probably using chi. Though I think Cosmo is supposed to be the equivalent of chi here. But, it's like, even though we don't have Cosmo, we can still do damage. And this one, like, Steel Saint chick who looks like Zero from Mega Man, she, I think that was probably the point. Heck, Subaru kind of looks like X when you think about it. But, a little bit. Some more people look at comparing to Seiya, and I would agree that Subaru's more like, regular Seiya, like OG Seiya. But at the same time, it's like, do we really need that? Anyway, so we have those three fights going on. We go back to the fight between the Bronze Saints and Seiya and Saturn. Koga, Eden, Haruto, Yuna, Ryuho, and Soma all went with Seiya to go fight Saturn. And they all duke out, and Saturn beats him up. Then it turns out Seiya jumps in. Then it turns out that, well, one, he's getting beaten up, but then it turns out that he was just trying to get close, so he could use this dagger, the God Dagger, to kill him. It's like, I should have done this before. And he tries it, but then it turns out it doesn't work, because, of course, Saturn, being the god of time, can't really be hurt by things, or he can heal really quickly. He's almost like Wolverine, except Wolverine to the extreme. But anyway, so after that, Seiya gets beaten up, and Koga, he's like the last one, and it's like, come on, Koga, become a powerful saint, become a legendary saint, become a legend. And so all the saints put their Cosmo into Koga, and then he gets revived as like a friggin' super Omega cloth. Like, it's all golden and whatnot, and he's even more powerful than before. And he and Saturn duke it out. And of course, throughout this time, Koga's just all like, "You're Subaru, come back to us, Subaru." He's like, "No, I'm Saturn." And he starts to kind of crack a little bit while the fight goes on. He's just like, "Oh, is this joy?" And then, of course, Koga punches him in the friggin' chest and leaves a giant scar on him, like a giant, like, cross/star scar on him. And he's like, you've shown me that humans are good. And I'm gonna keep the scar so I will be reminded not to fuck anything up. But if the moment you guys turn to the other side, I will come back to destroy you. And Koga's like, we'll be there to defeat you. It's sort of that cliche anime ending where it's like we've beaten him. He's not dead, but he'll be back, and we'll be ready. I mean, to be fair, Koga does defeat Saturn. Winning the fight to end the story doesn't necessarily mean killing the bad guy. Defeating them or getting them to change their ways also kind of fills that. So after that, everything goes back to normal. Turns out that Shiryu and Iki and all the other saints who are quote-unquote dead are not dead, except for all the ones that actually, like, died. Like, Kiki, Fudo, Shiryu, and Iki are all alive. But Genbu and Sonya, who was another gold saint who started off as a silver saint, but then she became a gold, they're dead. Or it's implied that they're dead. Or it's implied that Sonya's dead. Genbu, he's dead. He's, like, completely dead, which is unfortunate. But anyway, then the series ends. Everything's back to normal. Then Harbinger is asked to become the Pope, which is friggin' insane. And he decides to do it, only to keep he's like, I'll do it, but just to keep you guys in line. And then Koga decides to go on a journey to, like, see the world and presumably help others in need. And Eden's all like, I'll go with you, because at this point they become friends. You know, at first, Eden kept calling Koga Pegasus, but then later on he started calling him Koga. So they became, like, friends. With Eden being all like, I hate people. You know, he's kind of searching for a purpose as well, because with Arya dead, he's all like, I can't protect my sister. But anywho, that's the end of Saint Seiya Omega. My overall thoughts, I liked it. My really only complaint with it is that it got kind of cheesy at times with the dialogue, especially with, like, the first season. Like, when they were fighting the Gold Saints, they were like, I don't know why you're fighting. Death is inevitable. And then everyone's like, as long as we believe and have courage in our hearts, we will win. We will beat you guys. And then with Season 2, it's all like, humans are evil. They need to be eradicated. Like, no, humans are good. They're very powerful. You have no idea what a group of people can do. Strength is in friends. So it's very cheesy, and it's very clear to me that this is geared towards kids. And of course, Saint Seiya, I feel like, was always geared towards kids. But this one is, it seems like it's more geared towards kids than the original. The original, I felt like, I don't know, maybe it's just the kids are different, and, like, censoring's different. So the show's not that bad, but it's kind of kiddish and childish. If you want something more mature, this probably isn't the show for you, but it is definitely a decent watch. And I feel like it follows the Saint Seiya fighting formula of, you know, fighting a bad guy, you know, good guys are, you know, considered weak just because they're, like, several ranks lower than the bad guy. They get beaten up, and then suddenly the good guys are like, I realize something, or I will burn my power, and then just defeats the bad guy in, like, 1 to 2 hits. I feel like it followed that formula pretty well, and of course the abundance of special attacks, and, you know, like the Pegasus Ryuseikens, and all that beautiful, beautiful stuff. And my other stuff, like, I feel like, you know, the stuff with Haruto, you know, not really wanting to be a saint, and Koga being jealous of Seiya and Saori, who, by the way, at the end, they hint that they might be a couple. Seiya and Saori, not Seiya and Koga, or any other pairing that you might think. So, I kind of hope they elaborate on that in the future. Like, maybe Koga's all like, fuck this, I want to be Saori. I want to be with Saori forever, and I'm going to fight Seiya for her right to love. Like, it becomes like a love fight. Which then it's like, okay, well, because, like, on just, like, a wanting to beat, you know, it's like, okay, you know, that's fine. But when you start to challenge someone else's love, that's where it starts to get kind of intense. And that's where it's like, oh, you're kind of trekking in a bad spot. And of course, with Haruto, it'd be interesting to kind of, you know, because he started off as a ninja, then he became a saint, he quit being a saint, and then he became a singer, and then he went back to being a saint. It's actually kind of interesting how they do that, I think. or I think would have been interesting. What I mean is that I think it would be interesting if they'd elaborate more on that. And if they do a season 3 or a video game or an audio drama, I think it'd be interesting if they elaborated on more stuff. Of course, now Koga being a legendary saint, he's pretty high up. I mean, the only other stuff I could really see them doing is like making a game, like an RPG game, like the Full Metal Alchemist games or Naruto Uzumaki Chronicles or something, where it's like an action RPG and like an original story. And it could start off where Koga and Eden are by themselves, but then it starts to kind of come into the back to the Saints, and you get to use more people, or you get to have more people on your team, or your party, I guess we'll say. I think it would be really interesting to see those two things elaborated on, or at least Koga's jealousy for Seiya and Saori, or jealous that what it is that he's jealous that Seiya gets more attention than Saori. That's the main thing. Which, I can understand why you'd be jealous if you love someone and then like someone else comes into the picture or someone's been there and you kind of have to compete. That can be kind of stressful, and of course I've been there, so that's I guess just because that's probably the reason why I'm interested in it, just because I can relate. And of course, I'd also like to see more action figures. And it's like, I know they released Koga in a second cloth, and they also did Eden. Of course, they're working on the others, and the one they just released is Seiya in his new cloth, which is one in his new Sagittarius, the one that you're actually seeing right now, not the one with the ascot or scarf or whatever. So I'm actually kind of interested in that figure, and I plan to get it at some point. Of course, they're doing a new Shun. And of course, there's the Saint Seiya Omega game for the PSP where Poseidon shows up again. But I think it'd be interesting if they, maybe even bring back Hades and, they make it more elaborate. Or just introduce another god from Greek mythology or whatever. Or, I don't know, like, maybe do a thing where, like, Athena's dad, I don't know who that would be, Jupiter? Would it be Jupiter or Zeus? I'd go with Jupiter. I think Jupiter is a better sounding name. Or Hercules or something like that. I think it'd be interesting if they did something like that. Essentially, I'd like to see this continue in some way, shape, or form. And, of course, there's no dub. Sentai Filmworks, Funimation, everybody get on it. It'd be awesome if you dubbed it. I'll buy it on DVD. And it's on Crunchyroll, so you can watch it all there. The entire series. All 97 episodes, subtitled in decent quality. Yeah, that's really my only real gripe with the show, that it was just a little cheesy. And, I tried to show the show to my friends, and they didn't really like it that much, from what I can tell. But, so I can kind of understand. And I can understand why they wouldn't really like it that much. But honestly, I like this show, and I would recommend it if you like Saint Seiya. I would recommend it more than Lost Canvas, that's for sure. But that's my thoughts on Saint Seiya Omega. This one was kind of long, but of course I was talking about an entire show, so yeah. Thanks for listening. My overall impression, it's good. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.